Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our live coverage of the latest mission from Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. I'm Will Robinson Smith. I'll be providing our commentary for the duration of this coverage. We're broadcasting from the Spaceflight Now News Bureau here at NASA's Kennedy Space Center. Stephen Young is running the technical operations of the broadcast. Adam Bernstein out in the field getting ready to both track the rocket and do some still photography. And our other race photographer, Michael Kane, has the morning off. You may see him pop into the live chat periodically, so if you do, be sure to say hello to him there. If you're not already following both of our photographers on social media, you can find them on X, formerly known as Twitter. Adam is A Byrne with an E, NYC, and Michael Kane, MD Kane Jr. I'm also on X if you'd like to give me a follow as well. We are currently T minus 58 minutes, 18 seconds and counting to the launch of this Falcon 9 on a rather cloudy day up here at the Cape. SpaceX is preparing to launch the Starlink Group 6-40 mission. This will be the 12th dedicated launch for SpaceX's upgraded Starlink V2 mini satellites this year. Currently, SpaceX is targeting a T0 liftoff time of 10:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. For our friends joining us from around the world, that's 15:30 UTC. If you'd like to help support our coverage of the space program, there's a quick and easy way to do that just by hitting the like button. Appreciate the little more than 900 folks that have joined us already at the start of our broadcast. Hitting like and sharing the stream will allow more folks to find this live coverage as we continue to step through the count this morning. And naturally, we can't do these launch broadcasts without the support of our wonderful channel members. So thanks to folks like Eric Dickens, Joey Schwartz, Callistia Lee, Gene Marcus, and Norman Reitzel, and many others who are joining us this morning. To all of you, a very special welcome. Really appreciate your support of the channel and for being with us on a leap year day. Extra day, meaning an extra launch. We've actually already had two other countries take advantage of a leap day launch opportunity. Both Russia and China have launched already today, and SpaceX looking to be the third. Last but not least, another great way you can support what we do here at Spaceflight Now is by using the YouTube Super Chat feature. If your comment or question is appropriate to be read on our show, we love to address it as we continue to count down to what is planned to be SpaceX's 12th launch again of Starlink satellites in 2024. So we'll be sure to keep an eye out on the live chat for that. With all that housekeeping out of the way, we're now less than 20 minutes away from the point at which the launch director will give their go for the started propellant load for this morning's launch. If you haven't been with us in a spell, SpaceX not providing mission audio ahead of the final 5 minutes of the count. Of course, when that does become available, we will bring that into the broadcast. We do have extensive experience covering Falcon 9 launches, so we'll keep you abreast of the visual cues that we're looking out for and let you know to the best of our ability that things are likely on track for the fueling operations. SpaceX is running the countdown from its Hangar X site at NASA's Kennedy Space Center. It's the facility where they refurbish Falcon boosters and prepare them for future flights, as is the case with this vehicle here. SpaceX also has support in part from the control room at its headquarters in Hawthorne, California. Again, SpaceX is targeting that T0 liftoff time of 10:30 a.m., 15:30 UTC from Pad 40. Pad 40, as you can see in this shot, surrounded by clouds, a little bit socked in, kicking out to the wide shot here. Just looking around elsewhere, you can barely see. This is Pad 39A here. SpaceX's other pad on Florida's Space Coast, where the Crew 8 mission the eighth rotation to the International Space Station was set to launch just after midnight tomorrow morning. However, because the weather along the ascent corridor in the area where, if necessary, they had to perform an in-flight abort, the weather is just not conditional to support a an abort there. And that is one of the watch items for a crewed mission. So NASA, SpaceX, and its partners have decided to stand down from the launch at 12:04 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. And instead, they are targeting now no earlier than 11:16 p.m. Eastern on Saturday, March 2nd, to attempt to launch the Crew 8 mission. Three NASA astronauts, one cosmonaut heading up to the ISS. Although weather doesn't look exceptional for that opportunity as well. So we'll be sure to keep our eyes on this mission and let you know what the conditions are like and if that launch does shuffle again. But rest assured, we will have extensive coverage of the Crew 8 mission whenever they do launch. And of course, Crew 7 when they return. Kick things back over to Pad 40 here at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. This view brought to us by our friend Chuck Briggs. We're T minus 52 minutes, 35 seconds and counting. While the weather certainly is far from what you'd call a Chamber of Commerce kind of a day, to just hear word from SpaceX that as the countdown clock shows, we are within an hour of Falcon 9 launching these 23 Starlink satellites. And from their perspective and from the latest weather briefing on their front, they say that weather is 95% favorable and all systems are looking good on the Falcon 9 rocket. So, despite what you see here on the live screen, they are confident that they'll be able to launch in 51 minutes, 52 seconds from now. That being said, because the Cape is pretty socked in with this mist and fog, tracking may not be the most pristine today. So our friends Pete Carstens with Max Q Productions, Chuck Briggs, and of course our own Adam Bernstein there at the press site will certainly do their very best. Give it the old college try, as it were. We will track this rocket as long as we can and pivot to onboard cameras when necessary. 45th Weather Squadron coming into today's launch opportunity gave this an 85% chance of favorable weather at liftoff. So, per what SpaceX just said, things have improved about 10%. 45th forecasters were watching both the cumulus cloud rule and the liftoff winds at the pad. So it sounds like some of those constraints have lessened just a bit. We're now T minus 50 minutes, 31 seconds and counting. Taking a quick peek at the live chat, Jeremy Ladd with a $5 super chat. Thanks so much for that, Jeremy. Really appreciate that. Says, well, not on my roof today. My KSC headed to the Saturn Center to watch the launch and take pictures of it. That's great. You know, the Saturn Center is a wonderful spot to watch a launch and certainly one of the closer areas you can get, especially for missions going from Launch Complex 39A and 39B. So hopefully, as we get closer to liftoff, some of the obstructions, visually speaking, clear out, and you're actually able to get some good pictures. Because right now, as you can see from our live cameras, it's not the most ideal, you would say. Now T minus 47 minutes, 54 seconds and counting. We'll return to the Falcon 9 mission in just a moment, but do want to thank Chuck Briggs for bringing us these live pictures right here. As you can see, Blue Origin's New Glenn Pathfinder vehicle appears to be lowering once again over at Launch Complex 36 there at the Cape. In the last several days, they've been conducting some fueling tests of the vehicle and had previously lowered it after bringing it out the first time. So it's unclear if in this lowering operation they'll be actually rolling it back into the hangar there at LC-36, or if we may see New Glenn rise again before they're ready to bring it back into the hangar. But we'll be sure to keep an eye on this pad as well as we continue throughout the countdown of the Falcon 9 flight over at pad 40. So again, thanks to Chuck for keeping your eyes open and making sure we didn't miss this opportunity to talk about another company that has big launch ambitions coming up later this year. Returning to the Falcon 9 launch, coming over here, talk about the countdown timeline for what we're expecting as we're just a little less than 8 minutes away from the start of this. Let's go ahead and let you know what to expect as we continue on towards the launch of the Starlink 6-40 mission. T minus 38 minutes, the SpaceX launch director will make the call from the pole to begin propellant load. If that go ahead is given, it'll start at T minus 35 minutes with RP1 being loaded onto both the first and the second stages of the vehicle. Rocket grade kerosene is what that stands for. At the same time, liquid oxygen loading will begin on board the first stage of the Falcon 9 rocket. T minus 16 minutes, LOX load will begin on the Falcon 9 second stage. But before that, we'll see the so-called big vent. Well, I say we'll see that. About T minus 20 minutes, 20 seconds is when it'll occur. Whether we'll actually see it today, given our obstructed views here, thanks to Mother Nature, we shall see. But fingers crossed we'll get that visual marker. It's the most visually striking piece of fueling, of course, prior to ground gas closeouts just before liftoff. T minus 7 minutes, the chill down of the 9 Merlin engines gets underway. It involves flowing a small amount of liquid oxygen through the plumbing and the turbo pumps and protects them from the risk of thermal shock and damage during the startup sequence. About 6 minutes out from liftoff, the first stage kerosene tank should be full. Then at T minus 4.5 minutes, the strong back retract sequence will begin. At this point, we should also be getting views from SpaceX, so hopefully cameras closer to the rocket there at the pad will provide less obstructed views of the fueling process. We'll actually be able to see the clamp arms opening up under the payload fairings and the transporter erector tilting back a degree and a half away from the Falcon 9 rocket. It stays in that position until liftoff, at which point it pulls back in a much more rapid fashion to clear the way for the vertical climb of the Falcon 9. About 2 minutes out, LOX load should be complete. At that point, the Falcon 9 is fully loaded with 1 million pounds of propellant. In the final 60 seconds, the control of the countdown is handed over from the ground sequencer to the Falcon 9's onboard flight computers. The propellant tanks are brought up to flight pressure. 45 seconds out, the SpaceX launch director gives their go for liftoff. The engine ignition command is issued at T minus 3 seconds. And if all 9 engines ignite and are healthy, the computer will give the command for the hold down clamps to release the vehicle for a T0 liftoff again at 10:30 a.m. Eastern, 15:30 UTC for all our friends joining from around the world. I'm going to go ahead and bring you the side by side of the New Glenn Pathfinder vehicle here as we approach T minus 50, or excuse me, 43 minutes away from liftoff of the Falcon 9 rocket as the lowering continues on New Glenn. T minus 42 minutes, 7 seconds and counting as we continue to take a tour around launch pads here. We're now looking at Ship 28 over at Starbase in South Texas as SpaceX is preparing for its third fully integrated flight test of its Starship rocket. Of course, in the past week, we did learn that the FAA has closed its mishap investigation into the flight, and there are 17 action items that SpaceX needs to perform before they go ahead and proceed with the third flight of Starship. 7 of those actions are concerning the Super Heavy booster. The other 10 involve the Starship upper stage. According to the FAA, some of the Starship upgrades include, and I quote, vehicle hardware redesigns, operational changes, flammability analysis, installation of additional fire protection, guidance, and modeling updates. Now, while the mishap investigation has been closed, that does not mean we have a launch date just yet for Starship in its fully integrated stack. That will come at a later date when SpaceX has ticked all of these boxes. Of course, the mishap investigation is a SpaceX-led endeavor, as it is typically with these types of mishap investigations. The launch provider will be the one leading them, with, of course, the involvement of the Federal Aviation Administration, or the FAA, and NASA as well. The FAA is the governmental body that oversees the investigation to ensure compliance with FAA-approved mishap plan and other regulatory requirements. So we've heard from Elon Musk that they're optimistically hoping for a mid-March launch of Starship on its third orbital test flight. Before we pivot away, we want to, of course, thank our friends over at Lab Padre for providing these live stream views of Starbase. That team does excellent work covering Starbase from tip to tail, as it were. There's a lot of activity that goes on there, increasingly so these days. And so we're very appreciative of our friendship and partnership with them, helping to bring all of us here on Florida's East Coast, as well as around the world, updates and live views of what's happening for this very important rocket down in South Texas. Pivoting back over to pad 36, New Glenn just about horizontal there as the lowering process has continued on with the Pathfinder vehicle. Fortunately, the vantage point we have over here is a little bit closer to LC-36, so we're actually able to see the New Glenn being lowered. And looks like we're starting to get a little bit of a better view of pad 40 there for the SpaceX launch this morning. I say slightly better. It's not terribly clear now, but it is definitely clearing up, as you can see the crew access tower starting to come into view a little bit more definitively. Same over in the live box on the left-hand side, Launch Complex 39A. You can actually see the Starship tower there on the right-hand side, and in the center, the crew access tower and the Falcon 9 rocket supporting the Crew 8 mission. Crew Dragon Endeavour at the top of that vehicle. This will be the 5th time Endeavour takes flight when this mission launches, cementing its place as the flight leader for SpaceX and NASA. Endeavour first flew, of course, on the Demo 2 mission, the first time astronauts headed up to the International Space Station on board a Dragon spacecraft. Currently, Dragons are certified for 5 flights. Although in a recent pre-launch press conference, we did learn that they are in the process of certifying them for up to 15 flights, is what they're working towards. There are some pieces of the Dragon that they have already certified for up to 15 flights. Some are in the works, somewhere in like the 7 or 8 flight mile marker. So that process is still very much ongoing. We will keep you posted as we learn more about that. As is Steve Stitch, who is the manager of the commercial crew program for NASA, said that they may or may not reach an interim stage of certification for Dragons, something less than the full 15 as they continue to work towards that ultimate goal at this stage. But that is yet to be determined what that sort of middle number may be. We're now T minus 38 minutes, 7 seconds, and counting away from the Falcon flight here over at pad 40. At this point, if SpaceX is ready to proceed with fueling, they will have given the go ahead, which will begin now less than 50 seconds from now, with both RP1, rocket grade kerosene, being loaded onto the first and second stages of the Falcon 9 rocket, as well as liquid oxygen on board the first stage. As we head into the planned start of fueling, want to thank Marcus Gallegos, one of our wonderful channel members, for gifting a Spaceflight Now membership. Really appreciate that, Marcus. Thanks so much for the generosity. And to whom the membership went, welcome aboard. Glad you could be with us. Channel membership comes with a number of perks, including access to our member-only videos here on YouTube, discounts at our online shop, shop.spaceflightnow.com, and of course, live 4K views for all the missions launching from Florida Space Coast. And to the more than 2,100 of you that are watching live this morning, glad you could be with us as well. If you haven't already, be sure to hit the like button and allow some more folks to find this live coverage, as we are now believed to be just into the start of fueling, about 30 seconds in. We're now T minus 32 minutes, 57 seconds and counting. Do have word from SpaceX that fueling is in fact underway, which is good news. That also means SpaceX is committed to making a launch attempt at 10:30 a.m., even though their launch window does extend out to 12:30 because they have started fueling. They are now committed to making a run at it at 10:30. If for whatever reason they are unable to launch, though, at that time, they do have additional backup opportunities available on Friday, March 1st, starting at 10:04 a.m. That is, of course, with the caveat that if the Crew 8 launch continues to stick with its current launch date and time of 11:16 p.m. Eastern on Saturday, March 2nd, and SpaceX is not able to launch Starlink today, the backup opportunity may not actually exist because SpaceX and NASA have an agreement that they will stand down from launching a Falcon 9 rocket that is not the Crew 8 mission within a 48-hour bubble of that launch time. So the space is why they're able to launch today, but should that space shrink, we will likely have to wait and see the Starlink 6-40 mission launch on another day. But now that the vehicle has started to emerge a little bit more clearly, let's go ahead and take advantage of this, I will say, relative lack of fog by talking about the launch vehicle itself, SpaceX's workhorse, the Falcon 9 rocket. Stands at 70 meters or 229 feet tall, has a diameter of 3.66 meters or 12 feet. Most of that is made up by the first stage, the bottom two-thirds of the rocket. Today's booster, tail number 1076, has flown 11 times, or excuse me, 10 times before. It's going for its 11th flight today. At the base of the first stage are the 9 Merlin engines, which burn rocket-grade kerosene and liquid oxygen, producing 1.7 million pounds of thrust. Around the engine compartment, you can see the black carbon fiber landing legs in the image on the right. It's used to land the booster on the drone ship. Of course, occasionally back at landing zones 1 and 2 as well. Above the first stage is the inner stage. This is a composite structure consisting of an aluminum honeycomb core surrounded by carbon fiber. In the image here, you can see the deployable hypersonic grid fins as well. These are titanium winglets that provide stability and steering for the Falcon 9. It comes back through the atmosphere tail first, like a big old dart. At the top of the inner stage are 3 mechanical latches that attach to the second stage. At first stage main engine cutoff, high pressure helium is used to release those latches. Automatic pushers ensure clean separation. The second stage engine nozzle is also housed safely inside the inner stage adapter until stage separation. Speaking of that second stage, the upper stage of the Falcon 9 is powered by a single modified Merlin engine called a Merlin vacuum engine, or an MVAC engine. It's equipped with a large nozzle, which is optimized for burns in the vacuum of space. It produces more than 200,000 pounds of thrust, and it'll be fired twice on today's flight to place the 23 Starlink satellites into their intended orbit. The MVAC engine burns the same propellant mix, RP1 and LOX, same as the first stage. Following Starlink satellite deployment, the upper stage will ignite a third time. This is a deorbit burn, driving the upper stage back into the atmosphere, where it will burn up and help to eliminate the risk of unnecessary space debris on this mission. Last but certainly not least, at the top of the rocket, the payload fairings containing the 23 Starlink satellites. The fairings are made up of a carbon composite material. They are 13.1 meters or 43 feet tall, and 5.2 meters or 17.1 feet in diameter. The 2 halves of the fairing will be recovered a little further downrange from where the first stage lands on the drone ship. They gently splash down under parachutes. We're now T minus 28 minutes, 4 seconds and counting. At this point, we're a couple minutes into the process of SpaceX loading cryogenic helium into the pressure vessels on the first stage. The helium is used to pressurize the main propellant tanks during flight. That same process will begin on the second stage at about T minus 25 minutes. T minus 27 minutes, 20 seconds and counting. Just taking a quick peek back at LC 36. See the New Glenn rocket still horizontal there at the pad. Does not appear to have been any motion laterally yet. So we will continue to keep an eye on this and see if Blue Origin plans to roll this rocket Pathfinder back into its hangar. Of course, if we do, and we're not in the midst of tracking the Falcon 9 rocket, we'll be sure to bring those live pictures to you as we are able. We're now T minus 25 minutes and counting. This cryogenic helium now flowing onto the second stage. Let's go ahead and talk about where this Falcon is going to fly once it leaves the pad. Let's talk a little trajectory, shall we? Of course, you're taking a look at satellite view of Space Launch Complex 40 there at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. Falcon 9 will lift off and fly in a southeasterly trajectory towards the Caribbean. The first stage, as we've discussed, will land on one of SpaceX's 3 drone ships. Today on deck, they're using the drone ship. Just read the instructions. The upper stage will continue on with the Starlink satellites. The fairing halves will jettison just a bit downrange of this map you see here as well. SpaceX has 2 East Coast-based recovery vessels they use to scoop up the fairing halves. Today, they're using Bob. Of course, Doug just got into port yesterday with the fairing halves from the previous Starlink mission, that being Starlink 6-39. The duo, of course, were named also after former NASA astronauts Bob Behnken and Doug Hurley, the duo of the Demo 2 mission that launched back on May 30th of 2020. See here an image of what the Starlink splashdown looks like from a presentation from SpaceX earlier this year. The fairings float down under parachutes, land in the Atlantic Ocean or in the Pacific Ocean. If we're talking about a Vandenberg launch. SpaceX noted that they save about $6 million per recovery. And at this point have flown well in excess of 300 times reflown fairings, that is. This is a nice sunset image of what that fairing recovery process looks like. According to SpaceX, their flight leader for payload fairings is 15 flights to date. They have at least one that's going for its 16th flight coming up sometime in March. a month which is actually only a day away as we are closing out a unique February on a leap day. A very happy leap day to everyone. We're now T minus 21 minutes, 50 seconds and counting. About a minute and some change away from the so-called big vent, which now that things are starting to clear up a bit, we should, I emphasize, should be able to see at least some of that take place. Again, another good visual indication that fueling remains on time and on track here at pad 40. We're now T minus 20 minutes, 17 seconds and counting. A little hard to see through the fog of the mist, but we do see the start of the big vent here at the pad. So the chill down of the feed lines is underway, setting up for LOX load on the second stage, coming up now in less than 4 minutes. As the big vent continues here at the pad, T minus 18 minutes, 50 seconds and counting. I'm going to take a quick look at the live chat and thank one of our wonderful channel members, Callistia Lee, for gifting 10 Spaceflight Now memberships. Really appreciate that, Callistia. Thank you so much for the generosity. And to those who are now Spaceflight Now channel members, first off, welcome aboard. Glad to have you with us. And if you haven't already, be sure to thank Callistia in the live chat. We also very much appreciate the more than 4,100 folks who are watching with us live on a somewhat overcast Florida morning. If you haven't already, please be sure to hit the like button to allow more folks to find this live coverage as we're closing in on the final 18 minutes of the count. We're now T minus 13 minutes, 56 seconds and counting. The big vent has wrapped up and things are starting to lighten up out here, which is certainly good news. I want to thank David Throgmorton, one of our wonderful channel members, for gifting a Spaceflight Now membership. Really appreciate that. Thank you, sir. We did have a question from one of our channel members, Eric Scott, who was asking if this is the first Leap Day launch to date. We were just going back through the records as we know them to see if that was in fact the case. And it appears as though, at least from a US perspective, this may be the first Leap Day launch, although we're just double checking to make sure that that is accurate. Although, from a global perspective, this is not the first. In fact, today, both Russia and China have each launched once today. So this will be potentially the third Leap Day launch to date, as well as today. So everyone getting on the Leap Day fun. And our honorary archivist, Stephen Young, going back and finding that there was a Japanese launch back in 1976 on February 29th. So that would have been the actual first. So coming in for a nearly three-way tie on the next Leap Day launches, with Russia coming in first and then China launching, I believe it was 13:03 UTC today. And if all goes well with SpaceX, T minus 11 minutes, 49 seconds, we'll have our third Leap Day launch today, fourth overall to date. So for all those space history buffs, looking back on that Japanese launch that Stephen brought us information about, the shorthand for that is ISS, but don't get it confused. It was obviously well before the International Space Station existed. The spacecraft that was launched was Japan's ionosphere sounding satellite. There you get the ISS. JAXA describes it as Japan's first ionosphere sounding satellite that it named UME or UMI. They say it was used to monitor radio waves in the ionosphere, forecast conditions for optimal use of shortwave communications. And that is your space history fact of the day. We're now T minus 9 minutes, 24 seconds and counting to the launch of the Starlink 6-40 mission, sending up 23 Starlink satellites today. That is the plan. T minus 8 minutes, 8 seconds and counting. About a minute away from the engine chill down sequence beginning. I want to thank Marcus Gallegos for a $10 super chat. Really appreciate that, Marcus, who asks a good question here as why SpaceX cannot pause the fueling. Says, why do they have to commit to the launch once fueling begins? I'll also finish out his comment here, saying that also, chat, it's free to like, subscribe, and share. Help support this wonderful channel. Well, thank you for the kind words, Marcus. And I will say, yes, liking, sharing, and subscribing is a big help to us. So for the more than 7,100 of you, if you haven't already hit the like button, that'd be very much appreciated. It allows the YouTube algorithm to do its thing and bring this live coverage to more folks as we're closing in on the final 7 minutes of the count. Engine showdown just about to get underway. To answer, Marcus, your actual question there of why they can't pause fueling, it's because of the propellant that they use. The liquid oxygen is super chilled, and if they were to hold, it would go out of the temperature range that they need it to be in, which is also why you see fueling wrap up so close to the T0 liftoff time is in order to make sure they have this super densified liquid oxygen, it needs to be kept at extremely cold temperatures. And the longer it sits, the greater the more time it has to come out of temperature compliance. And so they're unable to hold the countdown and need to go basically as soon as fueling has wrapped up. So I hope that fully answered your question. Now coming in on 6 minutes before planned liftoff, things are starting to clear up just a bit, and hopefully we'll be able to see this Falcon 9 launch for a little ways. Taking a look at Chuck Briggs' view here, though, things have not fully cleared up. It's somewhat Vandenberg-esque out here today. Although certainly not cloudy everywhere along Florida's Space Coast, a little bit further south, down in the Palm Bay, Melbourne area. Got some pretty clear blue skies around here. So hopefully for folks that are watching in person, if you're south of, say, Cocoa Beach, more in like the Satellite Beach area, or in Melbourne, Palm Bay, further on south in Florida, once the Falcon 9 rocket leaves the pad, you'll actually be able to see the flight of this vehicle as it heads on south. For T minus 5 minutes, 5 seconds and counting. I want to thank a few more folks for their support as we continue to step through the count. SG with a $5 super chat. Thank you so much. That thumbs up, Corgi. Continuing on as we get closer to liftoff. And welcome to our newest channel member, ICU, joining us at the pad leader level. Really appreciate that. Now, T minus 4 minutes, 38 seconds and counting. We're just now getting views and audio from SpaceX at the pad. As you can see here, fueling continues on the Falcon 9 rocket there.
Ground battery track has started.
That call out for the strong back retract sequence to begin. The clamp arms underneath the payload fairings will open up, and that transporter erector will recline about 1.5 degrees away from the vehicle. You can see those clamp arms opening up here. This vantage point also gives us a good opportunity to take a quick look at the crew access tower there just to the right of the vehicle. Well, actually now directly behind it. What we saw in that first image, or that first camera angle, I should say, as the clamp arms were opening up. You saw those two white boxes next to the tower, which from this vantage point, you can see sort of where the tower extends toward the camera in this angle. You see sort of these three silver rungs. The second one that's kind of parallel to the crew access arm. You can see two white boxes. From those, there's a slide system that ejects from there and runs along a series of cables that extend to the ground away from the rocket. This is part of the emergency egress system that SpaceX is developing and working to certify that will allow for astronaut missions to launch from this pad in the future. SpaceX and NASA confirmed to us earlier in the week that they're going to
Stage
be
one, launch
certifying
load complete.
a number of things on this tower that they weren't able to do with the Northrop Grumman Cygnus launch NG-20. They're hoping to test that out with the launch of a cargo Dragon mission, CRS-30, expected to launch from Pad 40. This will be the first time since the Dragon abort test that a second generation Dragon spacecraft will launch from this pad. So very much looking forward to that mission. We're now T-minus 1 minute, 53 seconds and counting from this launch that we're watching today, Starlink 6-40. The venting you're starting to see on your screen as the ground gas closeouts as
Stage
fueling
two,
is
launch load complete.
now completed, as you just heard. The Falcon 9 is fully fueled with 1 million pounds of propellant. As we come upon the last 60 seconds of the mission countdown, if you haven't already, be sure to hit the like button.
Ground
Got
gas
nearly
closeouts.
13,000 of you watching live. We'd love to bring some more folks to this live launch coverage coming in on a Thursday and a leap day. And as we've been discussing, this will be just the fourth time in history that a rocket has launched on leap day. The first time from the US. We're at T-minus 55 seconds and counting.
Falcon 9 is in startup.
We should be hearing the SpaceX launch director give their go for liftoff in just a few seconds.
Go for launch.
And with that call out, now 30 seconds away from liftoff, Falcon 9 is ready to support this flight, sending 23 Starlink satellites up to low Earth orbit. Now 20 seconds out. 15 seconds. And 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Engine ignition and liftoff of the Falcon 9 rocket, sending Starlink satellites up to low Earth orbit. The vehicle has cleared the tower. Falcon 9 quickly climbing into some clouds. Our tracking team working to get visual on the rocket again. Hearing the loud rumble given the amount of clouds in the area. Falcon 9 rocket now traveling faster than the speed of sound. A little more than a minute into flight. We're coming up on a number of events in rapid succession. The vehicle passing through max Q, point of greatest aerodynamic pressure on the rocket. Coming up at T plus 2 minutes and 26 seconds will be MECO, or first stage main engine cutoff. That'll be followed 3 seconds later by stage separation. Then the second stage engine start, followed by fairing deployment. T plus 3 minutes and 3 seconds. We're approaching 2 minutes into flight. Those 9mm engines will begin to throttle down as we approach MECO.
Vehicle is on a nominal trajectory.
MVAC chill.
In the call for MVAC chill down, they're thermally conditioning that Merlin vacuum engine before ignition.
MECO.
Stage separation confirmed.
MVAC ignition.
Great views of Florida. You can see all the clouds that were hanging around Florida Space Coast, creating less than ideal views of a launch liftoff. Coming up on fairing separation now. So the hypersonic grid fins have deployed.
Fairing
there go
separation confirmed.
there go the payload fairings. Those Starlink satellites now exposed to the vacuum space for the first time, and you can see those fairings falling back to Earth, where they will land in the Atlantic Ocean under parachutes. Get ready to be scooped up by the drone ship, or excuse me, by the recovery vessel, Bob. Meanwhile, the Falcon 9 first stage, tail number 1076, making its way toward the drone ship. Just read the instructions. Coming up on 4 minutes into flight. Coming up on 4.5 minutes into flight. The next milestone will be the first stage entry burn. That burn lasting 22 seconds, beginning at T plus 6 minutes and 5 seconds. Those bursts that you see there on the Falcon 9 first stage of the cold gas thrusters that are orienting the Falcon 9 first stage in the correct attitude ahead of the entry burn beginning.
Vehicles are on a nominal trajectory.
You can see by the altitude meter that the Falcon 9 first stage has passed and is descending from its apogee now, closing in on just 100 kilometers above the Earth's surface. The speedometer will rapidly drop as soon as that entry burn begins as well. Now a little over 5.5 minutes into flight, less than 30 seconds away from that entry burn beginning.
Stage 1 FTS has saved.
Stage 1 entry burn startup.
We hear the call out, see the visual, the entry burn underway. Again, this will last just 22 seconds. As the Falcon 9 first stage starting to hit the brakes, making its way down toward the drone ship. Just read the instructions.
Stage 1 entry burn shutdown.
Stage 2 FTS has saved.
With the conclusion of that entry burn, the landing burn is set to begin in just over a minute at about T plus 8 minutes. So we're coming up on 7.5 minutes into flight. All remains nominal with
Stage
both
1
the first
transonic.
and the second stages, as the first stage is now traveling below the speed of sound. So we're coming up on 8 minutes into flight.
Stage 1 landing burn.
See, the landing burn has begun. Just read the instructions has come into view.
Stage 1 landing leg deploy.
And
Stage 1 landing
touchdown.
confirmed.
Booster 1076, now 11 times up, 11 times down. We're waiting to hear the call. There's that call out for Seco 1, second stage engine cutoff. Falcon 9 upper stage will now go into a parking orbit until about T plus 54
Nominal
minutes
orbit
and
insertion.
9 seconds. At that point, there will be a quick 2-second burn with that Merlin vacuum engine. That'll set up for Starlink satellite deployment at T plus 1 hour, 5 minutes, and 18 seconds. And with an empty launch pad there, you can mark the first part of this Starlink mission a success with a good liftoff of the Falcon 9 rocket and a good touchdown of the booster on the drone ship. Just read the instructions. And now with SpaceX's Starlink launch well underway and less than an hour from satellite deployment, attention returns to a crew mission here at Launch Complex 39A as the crew 8 astronauts and the orbiting outpost. Again, currently set for no earlier than Saturday at 11:16 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 0416 UTC. The Crew Dragon spacecraft will take about a day to catch up to the International Space Station, where it will dock at the forward or Earth-facing port on the Harmony module. There will be a brief, about a 5-day handover between the quartet of the Crew 7 mission and those coming aboard with Crew 8, where they will familiarize themselves with operations aboard the space station, get adjusted to their new crew quarters before we go ahead and say farewell to Jasmine McBelly and the rest of the Crew 7 astronauts before they step aboard their Crew Dragon spacecraft and return to Earth for a splashdown off the coast of Florida. Again, weather being the key watch item here, not so much initially here at the launch pad, but rather along the abort areas downrange. That is the reason why we're not seeing a launch in the overnight hours tonight and why they are pivoting to the backup opportunity currently for late night on March 2nd. Weather's still not the most pristine for that opportunity either, though, so they are continuing to watch that when it does come about. In its most recent published forecast showing the launch weather conditions for a Saturday night launch, and this may have changed since it was published, so we'll look for the latest updates in the next several hours here. But as of the latest update forecast from the 45th Weather Squadron for this Crew 8 mission, we're looking at only 40% odds of favorable weather at liftoff, with the thick cloud layer rule, the flight through precipitation, and the cumulus cloud rule all being watch items for liftoff. In addition to that, the ascent corridor weather is listed as the moderate to high level range, which is certainly not where NASA, SpaceX, and its partners want to see that. So we'll continue to keep an eye to see if the weather does improve enough to support a launch attempt on Saturday night. And of course, you can count on Spaceflight Now to be there for you whenever we are, in fact, ready to see that launch happen. And given the success so far with the Starlink mission, let's go ahead and step through the mission stats as they now exist. But before we go fully into this, do want to thank a few more folks for their support of our live coverage this morning. Our thanks to Cheryl Harrison for a $10 super chat. Really appreciate that, Cheryl. Thank you so much. And to Falcon Lawn Dart, it's a great handle. Very generous $20 super chat. Thank you so much, Falcon Lawn Dart, for your support at that level. Do just want to briefly make mention of the fact that the super chats go to a couple of different ways of supporting the channel, in addition to help improving the quality of the live streams. Both super chats and channel membership help us in increasing the amount of on-the-ground reporting that we can do, not just here at Florida Space Coast, but also being able to travel to where the story is. As I just got back from a reporting trip over in Texas, about an hour north of Austin, having the opportunity to see Firefly's manufacturing facilities as they have now doubled their footprint there in Texas to support the development and manufacture of both the Antares 330 rocket in the new first stage, as well as the medium launch vehicle, which will include a new upper stage. Firefly Aerospace, working in partnership with Northrop Grumman, they held a ribbon cutting ceremony yesterday. We also got the opportunity to tour the manufacturing facilities, see a lot of great developments there on the engine and propulsion side of the equation, as well as the rocket bodies, and capped off the day at their spacecraft facility, where we had an opportunity to check out the Blue Ghost lunar lander, which is getting ready to launch later this year as part of NASA's Commercial Lunar Payload Services, or CLPS program partners. That mission also launching aboard a Falcon 9 rocket that'll lift off from Florida's Space Coast. Specific date has not been announced yet, but they are saying nominally fourth quarter of 2024 for that mission. So potentially the end of the year could be just about as busy as the beginning of the year if the timeline for all these companies holds. We may see the launch of Astrobotic's Griffin lander at the back quarter of the year, as well as another launch from Intuitive Machines. Obviously, we just got a lot of information about Odie and its Odyssey to the moon in a briefing yesterday from Intuitive Machines and NASA. So we'll have both of those companies launching in Q4, as well as potentially the Blue Ghost lunar lander. Fun fact, Blue Ghost is a type of firefly, hence why they gave it that name. Coming back to the mission stats for this Starlink mission, again, I just preface all that to say we really appreciate the support they provide us through with both channel membership and using the YouTube super chat feature. And that support goes to making trips like this possible so we can bring you good on the ground reporting. So be sure to keep an eye here on the YouTube channel as well as on our website, spaceflightnow.com, for more fruits of that reporting labor. For the Starlink 6-40 mission, though, this was the 11th flight of Falcon 9 booster 1076. This is the 304th Falcon 9 launch to date, the 19th launch of 2024. This is also SpaceX's 249th Falcon booster reflight, or the launch of a booster that has flown at least once. This is SpaceX's 19th orbital launch of the year, the 202nd orbital launch within the last 365 days. This was SpaceX's 170th orbital launch from Pad 40 and the 225th overall orbital launch from this pad so far. Seeing that in a bar chart, SpaceX continues to climb up, slowly but surely catch up to its record that it hopes to well surpass by the end of the year. SpaceX hoping to launch on average about 12 times per month when you smooth everything out by year's end. Moving on to some recovery stats here. This was the 73rd landing of a booster on the drone ship. Just read the instructions. This was SpaceX's 216th drone ship landing to date, and its 278th overall booster landing when you bring in the landing zones to the equation as well. Finally, moving out to the broader space industry, this was the 13th orbital launch from Florida on a leap day as well. This was the 20th orbital launch from U.S. soil, the 22nd orbital launch from a U.S. rocket company, bringing in Rocket Lab with its 2 launches from New Zealand. And this was the 41st orbital launch globally. It was on track until just a few hours ago when China managed to get a launch in there with a classified payload, snag the 40th spot. So this Starlink mission became the 41st orbital launch globally. Bringing it out to that full globe picture, here is our pie chart of where things currently stand right now. U.S. currently continues to lead on sheer number of launches, representing 54% of the global launch market. China has about a quarter of that with 10 launches so far. Russia now in the 3rd spot, having launched 3 times on the year. India, Japan, and Iran, each with 2 orbital launches to date as well. I want to thank a few more folks for their support coming in here as we close out our live launch coverage this morning. Helena Olejnik with a 20 Canadian dollars super chat. Really appreciate that, Helena. And hello to all of you up in Canada. Appreciate you joining us. And last but certainly not least, thanks to Mama Robinson, my mom, Mary Robinson, with a $20 super chat, closing us out. Really appreciate that, Mom. Thanks for popping in with us on a rare leap day launch, connecting Florida's coast with the West Coast. Some may even say the best coast. but who's to say? As we close out our coverage, want to thank our friends Pete Karstens with Max Q Productions and Chuck Briggs for doing their weather best to try to bring us some tracking views this launch, but sometimes you get skunked by clouds, and there's not a whole heck of a lot you can do about that. But we certainly appreciate the fellas being with us and doing their level best to track the rocket. Yeah. Also want to thank our launch photography team of Adam Bernstein and Michael Kane, both of whom were out snapping pictures of the rocket as best we could expect given the cloudy conditions. So be sure to check out their launch photography on their social channels as well as Spaceflight Now's as we close out our coverage. Our thanks as well to our editor, Stephen Young, for running the technical operations of the broadcast. And most important, thanks to you for spending part of your day with us and seeing as best we could this rocket leap off the pad on a leap day. Starlink 6-40 mission in the rearview mirror. And again, we're keeping our eyes very closely on the weather and its impacts on our next crew mission launching from pad 39A. On the way out, be sure to subscribe to Spaceflight Now here on YouTube if you haven't already. Click the bell icon to allow notifications to come in, and be sure to select all notifications so you get alerted when we post live launch content as well as videos here on YouTube. For all of us here at Spaceflight Now, be good to yourselves, be good to others, and we will see you next time. I'm Will Robinson Smith. We'll see you soon. Bye-bye.